The housewarming party was supposed to be a celebration, a culmination of years of sacrifices and hard work. As I stood there, mingling with guests in the spacious living room of the house I had poured my life savings into, I felt a rare sense of accomplishment. This was more than just a house to me. It was the symbol of a future I had built, brick by brick, for Emily and me. The evening had been going well, or so I thought. Guests were laughing, enjoying the catered food Emily insisted on ordering, and offering compliments about the house. Emily had chosen everything: the granite countertops, the modern light fixtures, even the shade of the living room paint that she said perfectly reflected our journey. I smiled every time someone remarked on the details, knowing I had made it all possible. I didn't think much of it when Emily walked to the center of the room, holding up a glass of champagne. She tapped it lightly with a spoon, and the room fell silent. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her tone warm and inviting. "This house is more than just a place to live. It's a new chapter, a fresh start." I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her with pride. Emily always had a way with words. She made people feel included, inspired, even when the words were simple. But as she continued, a creeping unease settled in my stomach. Something in her tone changed. It was subtle, but I caught it, a shift from gratitude to something I couldn't yet place. "And tonight," she said, glancing at me briefly before her gaze moved to the other side of the room, "I want to honor someone who truly deserves this house. Someone who has been my anchor, my inspiration, and the reason I've been able to dream big." I started to smile, thinking she was going to acknowledge me. After all, hadn't I been her anchor? Hadn't I worked day and night to save up for the down payment on this house? But before I could fully form the thought, Emily turned to Derek. Derek. The room shifted in my vision. Derek, the man I'd met once or twice at her office parties, the man she always claimed was just a colleague. Derek stood there, smirking in his tailored suit, holding his champagne glass like he'd already won something. "Derek," Emily continued, her voice soft and trembling in a way I hadn't heard in years, "this house is yours. You deserve it more than anyone." The words hit me like a freight train. I stood frozen, replaying her statement in my head, as if somehow it would make more sense the second time. But it didn't. It was absurd, surreal, and yet I couldn't deny what I'd just heard. The guests were quiet, too, shifting uncomfortably. Some looked at me with pity, others at Emily with disbelief, but no one said a word. She pulled out an envelope, one of the expensive ones I'd bought for our wedding invitations years ago, and handed it to Derek. "Here," she said, smiling at him. "It's official. The deed is yours." My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. I gripped the counter to steady myself, my eyes glued to the envelope in Derek's hand. The deed. The deed. The document I'd signed, the culmination of every late night, every missed vacation, every sacrifice I'd made. She'd handed it to him like it was a gift, a gesture of love. My jaw tightened as I struggled to process what was happening. Derek opened the envelope and held up the papers, flashing them like a trophy. "Thanks, babe," he said, smirking at Emily before glancing at me. "I'll take good care of it." I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers right then and there. But I couldn't. My throat felt dry, my voice trapped under the weight of my disbelief. Instead, I looked at Emily. "Why?" I managed to croak out, though the words sounded foreign to me. She didn't even flinch. "Because he needs it more," she said casually, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "You'll be fine, Liam. You always land on your feet." The casual cruelty of her words stunned me. I looked at Derek, who met my gaze with a smirk, and something inside me snapped. I didn't make a scene, though. I didn't yell or throw anything. Instead, I placed the untouched champagne glass on the counter and walked out of the room. If Emily thought this was the end, she was wrong. She and Derek had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. This wasn't over. As the night dragged on, the sting of betrayal turned into something darker, something sharper. I retreated to the corner of the living room, the laughter and murmurs of the guests fading into the background. My mind was spinning, but not with the humiliation I felt earlier. Now, it was filled with memories, fragments of my life with Emily, and the endless sacrifices I had made for us, for her, for what I thought was our future. Sacrifice had become second nature to me. I grew up watching my father work himself into the ground to provide for our family. He always told me, a man's worth is measured by what he's willing to give for the people he loves. I took that lesson to heart. It shaped the way I lived, the way I loved. But looking around that room, watching Emily beam at Derek like he was her knight in shining armor, I wondered if I had misunderstood the lesson. Was sacrifice supposed to be a one-way street? I remembered the late nights at the office, grinding through endless lines of code for clients who barely understood what I did. I was the go-to guy, the one they called at 2 a.m. when a server crashed or a system failed. I never complained. I told myself every extra dollar I earned brought us closer to our dream. Our dream. It wasn't just the work, though. It was the opportunities one passed up. The promotion that would have required us to move out of state. Emily didn't want to leave her friends, so I turned it down. The solo trip to Europe I'd planned since college. Emily said it was selfish to spend that kind of money on myself when we were saving for a house, so I canceled it. I even sold my vintage motorcycle, the one thing I had left from my dad, because Emily insisted it was dangerous and irresponsible to keep it. And then there was the house itself. I spent years saving for it. While my friends were buying flashy cars and taking exotic vacations, I lived frugally. Every dollar I didn't spend went into the Dream House Fund. I pictured the life we would have there. Lazy Sunday mornings on the porch, Christmas dinners with family, maybe even a nursery down the hall someday. I poured my soul into that vision. When the time finally came to buy, Emily was ecstatic. She picked out every detail, from the hardwood floors to the custom backsplash in the kitchen. I didn't mind. Seeing her happy made the sacrifices feel worth it. Or at least, it did at the time. But now, those memories felt like daggers. Every choice I made, every penny I saved, every compromise I accepted, it all led to this moment. Emily, standing in my house, handing the deed to Derek with that smug smile on her face. It wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery. She wasn't just dismissing my sacrifices. She was spitting on them. I thought back to the signs I had ignored. The nights she came home late, claiming she had to work overtime or meet a client for drinks. The way she started pulling away, physically and emotionally. The unexplained charges on our joint account, hotel stays, expensive dinners, new clothes that didn't match her usual style. I told myself she was stressed, that she needed time, that it was just a phase. I wanted to believe the best about her, even when the evidence piled up. I should have seen this coming, but I didn't, because I trusted her. Because I loved her, and because I had spent so many years convincing myself that love meant giving, even when you had nothing left to give. The laughter in the room pulled me out of my thoughts. Derek was holding court in the corner, telling some story that had Emily and a few of her friends in stitches. I stared at him, trying to figure out what she saw in him. He wasn't particularly handsome or charming, at least not to me. He was just average. And yet, she looked at him like he was the center of her universe. I glanced at the champagne glass in my hand. It was still full. I hadn't touched it since the toast. The bubbles had gone flat, just like my dreams. Sacrifice. That word kept echoing in my head. My sacrifices had built this house. My sacrifices had paid for Emily's lifestyle, for her security, for the freedom she clearly didn't appreciate. And now, I was supposed to just accept this? To walk away quietly while she and Derek reaped the rewards of my hard work? No, I wasn't going to be that man. Not anymore. As I stood there, something shifted inside me. The Liam Turner who had always been the nice guy, the one who bent over backward to make everyone else happy, was gone. In his place was someone new. Someone who wasn't afraid to fight back, to demand what was his. They had underestimated me, all of them. They thought I would just roll over and let them take everything I had worked for. They were wrong. I set the champagne glass down on the table and straightened my tie. My sacrifices weren't going to be wasted. If they thought this was the end, they didn't know me at all. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The party finally ended, though the echoes of laughter and conversation lingered in the silence of the house. Guests left, offering Derek and Emily congratulations, as if they were the perfect couple who had just purchased their first home together. I stood at the door, watching them go, barely able to meet their pitying or awkward glances. No one looked at me directly for too long, as if my humiliation was contagious. When the door clicked shut behind the last guest, Emily turned to me with a cool expression. "You didn't have to make it so awkward, Liam," she said, crossing her arms. "You could have been happy for us. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be." I didn't respond. My jaw clenched so tightly that I could feel the tension in my temples. I didn't trust myself to speak. Not yet. I needed to think, to process, to figure out how far this betrayal went. Emily might have thought she'd won, but she didn't know me as well as she believed. She disappeared upstairs, probably to call Derek and gush about how well everything went. I stayed downstairs, pacing the living room and letting the events of the night replay in my mind. Something didn't add up. No, everything didn't add up. Emily had handed Derek the deed. The deed, without so much as a glance in my direction. That wasn't just betrayal, it was arrogance. She wasn't worried about the consequences because she believed there wouldn't be any. She must have thought I'd roll over like I always had, take the hit, and let them move on with their plans. But there were too many loose ends. How did she transfer the deed without my involvement? My name was on every piece of paperwork when we purchased this house. I had signed the mortgage, the agreement, everything. I wasn't naive enough to believe she could have done this legally, not without forging something or bypassing some critical step. I needed answers. I started with the filing cabinet in the small office we shared. Emily wasn't the most organized person, which meant there was always a chance she'd left something important lying around. Sure enough, buried under a pile of old bills and receipts, I found a folder labeled House. Inside, I found the original paperwork, the documents we'd signed when we closed on the house. My name was listed as the primary owner, with hers as a co-owner. I stared at it for a moment, feeling the anger in my chest tighten. The deed transfer was impossible without my signature. I kept digging and found another document. This one was dated just a few weeks ago, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a letter from a real estate lawyer, someone I'd never met, addressed to Emily. The letter explicitly stated that transferring the deed without my consent was illegal and could result in criminal charges. I sat down, my head spinning. So she knew. She knew it was illegal. She knew it could blow up in her face, and she did it anyway. Derek must have been in on it too. They both had to be. I could practically hear them laughing about it behind my back, smug in their belief that I'd never fight back. But it didn't end there. The final document in the folder was a photocopy of the deed with Derek's name on it. My signature was on it too, or at least a version of my signature. I leaned in, studying it closely, and my stomach churned. It wasn't my handwriting. It was close, but not close enough. It was forged. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Emily had forged my signature. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd crossed a legal line. And Derek, he must have been complicit. There was no way he'd accept the deed without questioning how she got it. I felt my hands tremble as I put the papers back in the folder. Anger coursed through me, but beneath it was something else, determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. If they thought I was just going to walk away from this house, from everything I'd worked for, they were in for a rude awakening. Pulling out my phone, I called Jacob. He answered on the second ring. "Liam? Everything okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "No," I said bluntly. Emily gave the house to Derek. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What?" Jacob finally said. "How is that even possible?" "I don't know, but I found the paperwork. She forged my signature, Jacob. There's a letter from her lawyer warning her it was illegal." "Jesus," he muttered. "You need to talk to Olivia." Olivia, his sister, the sharpest real estate attorney in the city. I'd met her a few times at Jacob's family gatherings, and she always seemed no-nonsense and laser-focused. I wasn't sure I wanted to drag someone else into this mess, but what choice did I have? "Send me her number," I said. "I'll call her first thing in the morning." "Do it," Jacob said firmly. "And Liam? Don't let them get away with this." I hung up and leaned back in the chair, staring at the folder in my lap. They thought they'd outsmarted me. They thought they'd stolen my life and walked away clean. But now I had the proof. Their arrogance had left a trail, and I was going to use it. As I closed the folder and locked it in my desk drawer, I made a silent promise to myself. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after the housewarming party, I sat across from Olivia, Jacob's sister, in her modern, minimalist office. The walls were adorned with framed diplomas and accolades, and the air carried the faint smell of fresh coffee. I had barely slept, my mind racing with the details of the betrayal I had uncovered. Emily had handed Derek the deed to my house, and now I was here, ready to fight back. Olivia leaned back in her chair, flipping through the stack of documents I had brought with me. Her sharp eyes scanned each page with precision, occasionally pausing to jot down notes. I sat in silence, gripping the coffee she'd handed me earlier, more for something to do with my hands than for the caffeine. After what felt like an eternity, Olivia finally looked up at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and simmering anger. "Liam, this is bad," she said, placing the papers on her desk. "What they've done is not just immoral, it's illegal. There's no gray area here. This is outright fraud." I nodded, though the weight of her words still hit me hard. "I knew it," I said quietly. "I knew something wasn't right." Olivia picked up one of the documents, tapping it with her pen. "First, they forged your signature. That alone is a criminal offense. But it doesn't stop there. The letter from the lawyer Emily hired clearly states that transferring the deed without your consent is illegal." She ignored it. She knew exactly what she was doing, and so did Derek. Hearing it laid out so clearly made my stomach churn. I had trusted Emily. I had built a life around that trust, sacrificing so much along the way. And now, that trust was not just broken. It had been weaponized against me. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Olivia smiled, though it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that told me I had chosen the right person to fight this battle. "First, we file an emergency injunction. That will freeze any actions they're trying to take with the property, renovations, sale, anything. Once that's in place, we'll file a lawsuit to void the fraudulent deed transfer and restore ownership to you." Her confidence was reassuring, but a part of me hesitated. "And what happens to them?" I asked. "Emily, Derek, my wife." She raised an eyebrow. "That depends. If they fight this, the consequences could be severe. Forgery and fraud are serious crimes, Liam. We're talking fines, possible jail time. But if they agree to settle, we might be able to avoid that." I nodded slowly, the gravity of the situation settling over me. Did I want them to face criminal charges? A part of me screamed yes. They had stolen from me, humiliated me, betrayed me in a way I never thought possible. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still remembered the good times with Emily, wasn't sure if I could handle seeing her behind bars, no matter how much she deserved it. Olivia must have seen the conflict on my face. "Liam," she said gently, leaning forward, "this isn't just about them. This is about you. They're counting on you being too nice to fight back. That's how people like this operate. They take advantage of your decency, your willingness to sacrifice. But you have every right to stand up for yourself. And if you don't, they'll keep walking all over you." Her words struck a chord. She was right. This wasn't just about getting my house back. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect. Emily and Derek had built their little scheme on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back. It was time to prove them wrong. "All right," I said, my voice firm. "Let's do it." Olivia nodded, a satisfied glint in her eye. "Good. I'll file the injunction today. In the meantime, I need you to gather anything else you can find. Emails, bank statements, anything that shows their intent or proves your ownership of the house." I left her office feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just reacting to what they had done. I was taking action. The next few days were a blur of activity. I combed through my emails, my bank records, and even the receipts from the house purchase. Every document, every detail, became a weapon in my arsenal. Olivia worked quickly, filing the injunction and sending notices to Emily and Derek. By the end of the week, they were officially on notice. The game had changed. I'll never forget the moment Emily called me, her voice laced with faux concern. "Liam," she said, What's going on? Why are we getting legal papers about the house? I didn't bother pretending to be calm. You know exactly what's going on, Emily, I said coldly. You and Derek stole my house. Did you really think I wouldn't do anything about it? Her tone shifted instantly, turning defensive. We didn't steal anything. Derek needs this house more than you do. You don't even have a family to support. Why can't you just let this go? Because it's mine, I snapped. And you had no right to take it. She tried to argue, but I hung up, my hand trembling slightly as I set the phone down. I could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface, but it wasn't the kind of anger that made you lose control. It was the kind that sharpened your focus, that made you more determined than ever to win. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself. I wasn't just the guy who gave, and gave until there was nothing left. I was someone who fought back. And Emily and Derek were about to find out just how much fight I had in me. It didn't take long for Emily and Derek to show their true colors. Barely 2 days after Olivia filed the injunction, they showed up at my apartment unannounced. I spotted them from my window before they even made it to my door. Emily was pacing in agitation, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, while Derek stood with his arms crossed, his usual smug demeanor replaced by something closer to panic. They looked like two people who knew the walls were closing in. I debated whether to answer the door or let them stew outside. But no, I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know that I wasn't the man they thought they could manipulate. I was done hiding, done shrinking myself to avoid conflict. When I opened the door, Emily didn't even wait for me to speak. "What the hell are you doing, Liam?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You filed an injunction? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Did you really think I wouldn't do anything after what you pulled?" Her face twisted in frustration, but Derek stepped forward, his voice low and condescending. "Look, man, this is getting out of hand. Emily explained everything to you, didn't she? The house isn't a big deal. You don't even need it. Why are you making this so difficult?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Not a big deal? You forged my signature, transferred the deed without my consent, and gave my house, to your boyfriend. And now you're standing here asking why I'm making this difficult?" Emily's face flushed with anger. "You're being ridiculous. Derek needs that house to start his business, to build a life for us. You don't even have a family, Liam. You don't have anyone who depends on you. Why can't you just be happy for us?" Her words were like gasoline on a fire. For years, I had been the dependable one, the one who sacrificed for everyone else. And now, she had the audacity to dismiss me like this, to tell me I didn't matter because I didn't have a wife or kids to show for my hard work. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "Emily, the only thing I've ever done wrong was trusting you. I gave you everything, my time, my money, my loyalty, and this is how you repay me? By stealing from me? By betraying me?" Her eyes darted away for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "You're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a house, Liam. You can buy another one. Just a house." I repeated, the anger bubbling beneath my calm exterior. "That house represents years of my life. Every late night, every missed vacation, every dollar I saved instead of spending. It all went into that house. You don't get to stand here and tell me it's just a house." Derek, clearly uncomfortable with the way the conversation was going, tried to interject. "Look, maybe we can work something out. There's no need to get lawyers involved." "Too late for that," I cut him off. "This is already in motion. And if you think I'm going to back down, you're even dumber than I thought." The color drained from his face, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Good. He deserved to feel every ounce of the anxiety they had caused me. Emily, however, wasn't ready to give up. "Liam," she said, her tone softening as she tried a different tactic. "We're family. Do you really want to destroy our relationship over this? Can't we just sit down and talk this through?" I stared at her for a long moment, wondering how she could still play the family card after everything she had done. "Emily," I said slowly, "you destroyed our relationship the moment you handed Derek that deed, and now, you're going to face the consequences." Her expression hardened, and and I could see the gears turning in her head. She wasn't used to this version of me. The version that didn't fold under pressure, the version that refused to be manipulated. It clearly made her uncomfortable. Before they could say anything else, I stepped back and gestured toward the street. This conversation is over. If you have anything to say, you can say it through my lawyer. Emily's mouth opened as if to argue, but Derek grabbed her arm. Let's go, he muttered, pulling her away. He's not worth it. As they walked back to their car, I stood in the doorway, watching them leave. Emily glanced back once, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her guilt or manipulate me anymore. When they drove off, I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear or regret. It was adrenaline. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. They had underestimated me, and now, they were going to see just how wrong they were. This was far from over. The days following the confrontation were filled with a mix of chaos and satisfaction. Emily and Derek must have realized they'd underestimated me, because they quickly shifted from arrogance to desperation. The legal papers Olivia sent had thrown their plans into disarray. They couldn't move forward with renovations or sell the house. Everything was frozen. And judging by the barrage of calls and texts I started receiving, they were panicking. I ignored most of the messages at first. What was there to say? They'd betrayed me, stolen from me, and expected me to roll over. But I was done playing nice. I let Olivia handle all communication from that point forward. If they wanted to talk, they could go through her. One day, as I was heading out for work, Olivia called. Her voice was calm, but I could sense the excitement beneath her professional tone. Liam, I've got some news, she said. They've responded to the lawsuit. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. And they're trying to claim that you agreed to the transfer, she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. They're saying it was a mutual decision. My jaw clenched. Mutual? They forged my signature. Exactly, Olivia replied. And we have the evidence to prove it. The letter from their lawyer warning them about the illegality of the transfer is a smoking gun. And don't forget, we've got your original deed and all the financial records showing you made the down payment. I let out a slow breath, the tension in my chest easing slightly. So what happens now? Now, she said, we push forward. I've already contacted the district attorney's office. They're interested in the case, especially given the forgery and the clear intent to defraud you. This isn't just a civil matter anymore, Liam. This is criminal. The word criminal hung in the air. I'd known, intellectually, that what they'd done was illegal, but hearing it framed as a criminal offense made it feel even more real. I thought of Emily's confident smirk at the party, Derek's smug attitude. Did they realize how deep they were in now? Do you want to press charges? Olivia asked, her voice softer now. It's your call. The question gave me pause. Part of me wanted to see them face the full weight of the law. They had stolen from me, humiliated me, and thrown my trust back in my face. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times with Emily, hesitated. Did I really want to see her behind bars? I'll think about it, I said finally. Let's focus on getting the house back first. Fair enough, Olivia replied. But just so you know, the DA's office is prepared to move forward if you give the green light. They don't take forgery lightly. I thanked her and hung up, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. I wanted justice, but I wasn't sure where the line between justice and revenge should be drawn. For now, though, I focused on the practical steps. I was going to get my house back, no matter what it took. The fallout started almost immediately. Emily and Derek were served with court papers, and the legal proceedings began to gain traction. Word spread quickly. Friends, family, even casual acquaintances started hearing about the case. Suddenly, the narrative Emily and Derek had spun at the party began to unravel. I started getting calls from mutual friends, some offering their support, others fishing for gossip. Is it true? One of Emily's old college friends asked me. Did she really forge your signature? I thought you two were solid. I didn't waste time explaining. You'll hear the truth soon enough, I said, and left it at that. The tension reached a boiling point a few days later when Emily showed up at my apartment again, this time alone. She looked haggard, her usually flawless appearance replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a frazzled expression. She barely waited for me to open the door before she launched into a tirade. "Liam, you have to stop this," she said, her voice shaking. "This lawsuit is going to ruin us. Do you understand that? Derek's business is already struggling, and now he's being dragged into court because of you." I stared at her, incredulous. "Because of me? Are you serious right now? You did this to yourselves, Emily. You forged my signature. You stole from me. And now you're standing here trying to make me feel guilty?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "I was trying to do what was best for everyone," she said, her voice rising. "You don't need that house, Liam. Derek and I, we're building something together. Why can't you just let us have this?" Her words reignited the anger I'd been trying to keep in check. "Let you have it?" I said, my voice cold. "Emily, you didn't just take a house. You took everything I worked for. Every sacrifice I made. Every late night. Every dollar I saved. You took it all and handed it to Derek like it was nothing. And now you expect me to just walk away?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "No, Emily. I'm done being the guy who sacrifices everything for people who don't deserve it. You're going to face the consequences of your actions, whether you like it or not." For the first time, she didn't have a response. She just stood there, staring at me, before finally turning and walking away. That night, I got a call from Olivia. "Liam, I just got off the phone with their lawyer," she said. "They're starting to crack. They want to negotiate." I leaned back in my chair, a small, satisfied smile spreading across my face. "Good," I said. "Let's make them sweat a little longer." This wasn't over, not yet, but for the first time, I felt like justice was within reach. The cracks in Emily and Derek's smug facade widened as Olivia ramped up the legal pressure. Every day brought a new update, another victory in the slow march toward reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The house was frozen in limbo, their renovation plans halted, their schemes unraveling by the hour. I could feel the tide turning, and for the first time in weeks, I started to breathe a little easier. It was a strange kind of satisfaction, watching them squirm. Emily had always been so composed, so calculated, but now she was unraveling. Her calls and messages became frantic, oscillating between guilt tripping me and outright anger. One moment, she'd beg me to stop tearing the family apart, and the next, she'd accuse me of being selfish and vindictive. Derek, on the other hand, had gone silent, no doubt realizing his role in this mess was becoming harder to defend. Olivia's strategy was brilliant. Every move was calculated to apply maximum pressure. "We're not just fighting for the house," she reminded me during one of our meetings. "We're making a statement. They need to understand that they can't manipulate or steal their way out of this." One morning, I received an email from Olivia with the subject line, "Settlement offer received." My heart raced as I opened it. Emily and Derek's lawyer had proposed a deal. They would return the house, cover all my legal fees, and offer a paltry sum in damages if I agreed to drop the fraud charges. It was a weak offer, clearly a desperate attempt to minimize their losses. "What do you think?" Olivia asked during our call later that day. "I think it's insulting," I said, my voice firm. "They've put me through hell, and they think a few $1,000s is going to make it right?" Olivia chuckled softly. "I figured you'd say that. Don't worry, we're not accepting. But it's a good sign. It means they're feeling the heat." I leaned back in my chair, a small smile forming. For once, I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let it go. The next confrontation came unexpectedly. It was a Saturday morning, and I was enjoying a rare moment of peace with a cup of coffee and a book when I heard the knock at my door. When I opened it, there they were, Emily and Derek, looking as though they hadn't slept in days. Emily stepped forward, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "Liam," she began, her voice trembling, "we need to talk?" "I don't think we do," I replied, crossing my arms. "Please," she said, her tone softening. We're sorry, okay? We made a mistake. Can we just work this out? Without lawyers?" I stared at her, incredulous. A mistake? You call stealing my house a mistake? Emily flinched but pressed on. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We thought you'd understand. Derek needs the house to start his business, and you don't even. Stop, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't you dare stand here and try to justify what you did. You didn't just make a mistake, Emily. You planned this. You forged my signature. You lied. And now that you're facing the consequences, you want to act like it was all a misunderstanding? Derek, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. Look, man, we're trying to make this right. We'll give the house back, okay? We'll pay the fees. Just don't take this any further. I turned my gaze to him, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. You don't get to dictate how this ends. You and Emily thought you could take everything I worked for and walk away without consequences. You don't get to decide when it stops. I do. They both stared at me, their confidence shattered. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel even a twinge of sympathy. I had spent years bending over backward for her, sacrificing my happiness for hers. This time, I wasn't giving in. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice cold and steady. You're going to return the house. You're going to cover every sin I've spent fighting this. And you're going to sign a notarized statement admitting everything you did. No excuses. No justifications. Just the truth. Emily's tears spilled over, and she shook her head. You're being cruel. I let out a bitter laugh. Cruel? You think this is cruel? Cruel is stealing from someone who trusted you. Cruel is taking their sacrifices and throwing them away like they meant nothing. You don't get to call me cruel, Emily. Not after what you've done. They left shortly after, their heads hanging low. I watched them go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. This battle wasn't over yet, but the end was in sight. I wasn't just taking back the house, I was taking back my life. Later that day, Olivia called to share the news. Emily and Derek had agreed to settle. Not only would they return the house and cover my legal fees, but they'd also pay substantial damages. And most importantly, they'd sign a notarized statement admitting their fraud. As I hung up the phone, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. I had stood up for myself, and I had won. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-respect, and my future. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The settlement was finalized within a week, and just like that, the house was mine again. But as I sat at the dining table, holding the freshly signed deed in my hands, I realized something. I didn't want it anymore. The house no longer felt like the dream I had worked so hard for. Instead, it was a reminder of betrayal, of Emily and Derek's schemes, and of all the nights I spent drowning in anger and frustration. I didn't need those memories following me into the next chapter of my life. The decision to sell the house came quickly. Olivia helped me connect with a real estate agent, and within days, we had offers flooding in. One stood out, a developer who wanted to turn the property into upscale apartments. The offer was more than generous, well above market value. I accepted without hesitation. The day I signed the papers to sell the house felt like the true end of that chapter. I left the closing office with a check in hand, more money than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the financial gain. It was about finally being free. Free from the betrayal, free from the weight of the past, and free to start fresh. I spent the next few weeks searching for a place that truly felt like mine. That's how I found it, a modern loft on the edge of the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light. It was smaller than the house, but it was perfect. It felt open, peaceful, and most importantly, it was mine. No shared decisions, no compromises, just a space that reflected who I was and who I wanted to become. Moving in felt like the start of something new. The furniture I picked was simple but comfortable, the walls painted in soft, calming tones. I even hung a few framed photographs of places I wanted to visit: Paris, Tokyo, the mountains of New Zealand. These were dreams I had put on hold for too long, and now they were back on the horizon. One of the first things I did was invite Olivia and Jacob over for dinner. Olivia, always sharp and composed, raised a glass of wine and a toast. "To taking back control," she said with a smirk. "You've earned it, Liam." Jacob grinned. and to never letting anyone walk all over you again. We laughed, clinked glasses, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of ease. It was a reminder that while betrayal had rocked my world, it hadn't broken me. If anything, it had made me stronger. As the weeks turned into months, I settled into a new rhythm. My job, which had once felt like a grind, became a source of fulfillment again. Without the emotional drain of Emily and Derek weighing me down, I found new energy for projects and ideas I had shelved for years. I even earned a promotion, moving into a leadership role that came with better pay and hours. But it wasn't just work. I started taking time for myself in ways I never had before. I joined a hiking group, something I'd always wanted to try but never prioritized. I began experimenting in the kitchen, trying recipes I used to think were too complicated. And I even started traveling, taking a weekend trip to the mountains, a test run for the longer adventures I was planning. The loft became more than just a place to live. It became a sanctuary. In the mornings, I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up below. In the evenings, I'd light a candle, put on some music, and let the peace of my new life wash over me. It was simple, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. Emily and Derek were still out there, of course, dealing with the fallout of their choices. Word had spread about what they had done, and their reputations had taken a significant hit. Derek's so-called business plans never materialized, and the last I heard, he had moved back in with his parents after Emily broke things off with him. As for Emily, mutual acquaintances told me she was struggling financially, working a series of odd jobs to stay afloat. I didn't take joy in their struggles, but I didn't feel sorry for them either. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. That was justice, plain and simple. Every so often, Emily would reach out. A text here, a voicemail there. Always some variation of the same plea. Can we talk? I just want to explain. I never responded. What was there to say? Her actions had spoken loud and clear, and I had no interest in reopening that wound. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights, Jacob called. You know, he said, you've been through hell, but I've never seen you this alive. It's like you're finally living for yourself. He was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending to someone else's needs or expectations. I wasn't sacrificing my happiness to make someone else's dreams come true. I was building a life on my terms, and it felt incredible. As I hung up the phone, I glanced at the photographs on my wall. The Eiffel Tower, Mount Fuji, the rolling hills of New Zealand. They weren't just dreams anymore. They were plans. And I knew, without a doubt, that I would make them happen. This was my new beginning. A life free from betrayal, filled with possibility and promise. And as I sat there, sipping my coffee and watching the world go by, I realized I didn't just take back control. I took back myself. The months following the settlement were transformative in ways I hadn't expected. With the house behind me and my new loft becoming a sanctuary, I began to feel lighter, freer. It wasn't just about reclaiming the physical space of the house. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, my confidence, and my life. And while I was moving forward, Emily and Derek were left to grapple with the fallout of their choices. Word of what happened spread quickly. The notarized statement Emily and Derek were forced to sign admitting their fraud became a sort of legend among our mutual acquaintances. It wasn't long before friends, family, and colleagues distanced themselves from the two of them. Emily's carefully curated image as a charismatic, successful woman was shattered. Derek's reputation, already shaky due to his lack of professional success, was completely destroyed. I heard bits and pieces through the grapevine. Derek's business plans never materialized, and he spiraled into financial ruin. Emily, unable to maintain the facade of a stable life, broke things off with him. The last I heard, Derek had moved back in with his parents, nursing his bruised ego and blaming everyone but himself. Emily, on the other hand, was barely holding it together. She took on a string of odd jobs to stay afloat, and each one seemed to be a step down from the last. She reached out to me a few times, texts, voicemails, even an email once. They all followed the same script. She was sorry. She wanted to explain. She hoped we could talk. I never responded. What was there to say? Her actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could. I didn't need her explanations or her guilt. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let her pull me back into her web. While they floundered, my life flourished. The loft I'd chosen became a space of peace and growth. I threw myself into my work, earning respect from colleagues, and finally landing the promotion I had been eyeing for years. The extra money and better hours gave me the freedom to pursue hobbies I'd put on hold: hiking, cooking, even a little photography. I joined a local hiking group, something I'd always wanted to do but never found time for. The first time I reached the peak of a trail and looked out over the valley below, I felt something I hadn't in years: pride. Not the pride that comes from sacrifice or achievement for someone else, but pride in doing something for myself. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The loft itself became a reflection of my growth. I decorated it to suit my tastes: minimal, modern, and filled with light. I hung photographs of places I wanted to visit: Paris, the mountains of New Zealand, the temples of Japan. They weren't just dreams anymore. They were goals. Every time I looked at them, I felt a surge of motivation to keep moving forward. Family and friends occasionally tried to intervene, mostly on Emily's behalf. "She's struggling," they'd say. "She's learned her lesson. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her?" I always answered the same way: forgiveness doesn't mean letting her back into my life. My mother, who had always been a quiet supporter, surprised me with her bluntness one evening over dinner. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "People like Emily and Derek need to face the consequences of their actions. You've given enough. It's time to live for yourself." Those words stuck with me. Living for myself had always seemed selfish before, but now I understood it was necessary. I couldn't pour from an empty cup, and for too long, I'd let others drain me dry. A year after the settlement, I stood in the middle of my thriving loft, reflecting on how far I'd come. My garden of growth, both literal and metaphorical, was flourishing. I had started traveling, ticking places off my bucket list one by one. Paris had been the first stop, followed by a breathtaking trip to the Alps. Each journey felt like a step further from the man who once sacrificed everything for people who didn't deserve it. Even at work, I noticed a difference. Colleagues began seeking me out, not just for professional advice, but for personal guidance too. A young coworker confided in me about a toxic relationship she was struggling to leave. "If you could stand up to what you went through," she said, "I think I can stand up to him." That moment hit me hard. My story wasn't just about betrayal and revenge. It was about resilience. It was about proving to myself, and maybe to others, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Emily tried one last time to reach out. She showed up at my building unannounced, looking tired and worn down. "I just wanted to talk," she said when I opened the door. "I wanted to apologize." I studied her for a moment, remembering all the years I spent bending over backward to make her happy. "I've moved on, Emily," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You should too." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. I wished her well and closed the door, feeling no anger, no bitterness, only peace. I didn't hate her. I didn't love her. I just didn't need her in my life anymore. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The betrayal that had once defined me became the catalyst for a life I hadn't imagined possible. My loft was filled with light, my heart with hope, and my future with possibilities. Every decision I made now was for me, and every success was a reminder of how far I'd come. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about growing. It's about standing tall in the face of betrayal and saying, "You didn't break me. You made me stronger." And as I watched the sunrise from my loft one quiet morning, I knew with absolute certainty I was finally free.